Hey everyone, Ariel Adams here from aBlogtoWatch filming for Microlux. I am here at the Bindi flagship store and I'm going to be speaking to two members of the Bindi family. Ashwin, you are part of the new generation of people running the Bindi empire, and we're here at the biggest store. It's a lovely store.
Thank you.
We were talking about your enthusiasm for watches. You and Ron, who we're going to speak to, really love watches, and I think I wanted to start by asking, when did this family business get into watches, and how much of watches has been in the history? Because the company's been around for a while, having nothing to do with watches. So tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. Thank you for coming, and by the way, and welcome to our flagship store. We started the business in 1929 in the Fiji Islands. My grandfather started it back then in Fiji. My father and my two uncles actually took the business in the 70s from Fiji to Vancouver, Canada. That was our first footprint here in North America. And we stayed in there for about the 70s. In '85 came down here to Artesia, which was our first footprint in California and the US. And since then, we've developed over 4 different stores. We have here Artesia is our flagship store, which has been recently renovated in the past 3 years to our beautiful 17,500 square foot showroom, out of which 12,000 is dedicated to retail. And it is our new gem of the Bindi crown, where we have an immense amount of diamond jewelry for you to look at, a beautiful variety of high-end watches and 22 karat gold jewelry. And from '85 till to today, we have about 4 stores that we've created. One in San Francisco, just in the Fremont area. One in Atlanta, Georgia, in Decatur. Here, Artesia, and our latest store that we are actually in current renovation for is in the Glendale Galleria Mall. It's our first and only mall store, but it's a beautiful boutique and more of a watch destination.
So tell us from a family history perspective, it wasn't long after the family came to the United States that you did enter the watch industry, just a few years later. Why was so compelling at the time, and what was the world like in terms of watches at the time? It was an exciting growing area. Today, in 2020, it's so different. Give people a little bit of history of here in Artesia, what it was like in the watch industry when Bindi got started.
Sure. So Bindi got started actually in '98 with Rolex. And it was our first and only watch brand that we had carried as a Swiss watch brand. We'd carried them all the way up until 2011 when we added our first additional multi-brand, which was in 2011.
Very recently.
Very recently. And so really the cultivation of watches was from '98 onwards. For about 10 years, we realized how much of an immense response our clientele and our community had to watches. And also just watching the watch industry evolve as a whole, I think brought a lot of new energy to the table. A younger clientele as well as older clientele were both having this excitement towards watches, given a lot of people had thought it was an older man's accessory. And now we've come to really prove to show that no matter the age demographic, all of our customers, from as young as you can imagine to our seniors, all have this immense appreciation for watches, collecting watches, and just getting to know about the dynamics of each brand.
You grew up in the watch industry, of course. Tell us some of your sort of most memorable moments growing up with watches. Most kids don't get to be around that. A lot of people, especially customers, don't get into watches until they're adults. But you had some great memories. Tell us about some of those.
So I was very blessed with growing up with jewelry and watches in my life, but as I mentioned earlier, watches hadn't really resonated me personally, I think, until I'd gotten into the business. I don't think I truly appreciated, especially at that time, what a Rolex watch was. I knew it was the pinnacle of the watch industry, but I hadn't really understood watches as a whole to truly appreciate what that meant.
You have to see everything else first.
You do. You kind of need to, it's hard to start at the top and then get an understanding of the industry. So for us, it was, we had the crown to begin with, which is fantastic, but there's so many other options that are beautiful watches, amazing brands that have created some beautiful timepieces, and just getting a better understanding of what they have to offer, what do they represent, what kind of engineering they've gone through to create these amazing innovations in their timepieces. Understanding that part of it gave a much broader perspective to the industry and a much deeper appreciation to the pieces alone. And I think it wasn't until probably around that 2011, 2010 timeframe where my mindset has really kind of expanded and that appreciation has just grown ever since. So we went from being retailers to really watch enthusiasts over that time frame. And it was a very organic growth between myself. As you had mentioned earlier, we do have a third generation, so it's myself and one brother and three cousins. And so all five of us have really grown into becoming watch enthusiasts over time. And I think that reflects and mirrors kind of what's happening in the last decade alone with our younger generation, that there's been an entirely new wave of interest in watches, and us being part of a younger generation, quote unquote, not being the older man's segment of it, I think have a different relationship with our customers because of that, because we understand both dynamics of the watch world, but more importantly, I think just being able to connect and to relate to our customers regardless of age, regardless of demographic or background, just out of sheer appreciation of these timepieces. I think that's what's really expanded and curated our business as a watch retailer opposed to being a jeweler. And it's really because of our own self-interest and our excitement for the watches that people don't always come in just to shop. They actually come in just to talk watches with us, and we love it because for us, we know that relationships curate business. If you're coming in, we don't look to see what you're wanting to buy. We want to know what kind of knowledge you want to gain from us. What can we make, how can we make this experience that much more memorable for you by sharing information with you, not just selling you products, but actually providing legitimate knowledge and hopefully something of interest that even if you're not ready to purchase now, you'll have that memory so that in the future, hopefully will be the point of sale for you because we have now a relationship and we're excited for the communication.
When you come into the store, you don't see every single brand that Bindi carries, but there's an assortment of them. How do you, as a watch lover and a retailer, how has that affected the selection of brands you have as opposed to being strictly a retailer? You're now an enthusiast, it's going to affect the selection. Tell me a little bit about the types of brands that people are going to see, as well as how you sort of think about the curation in each store.
Sure. So we have curated each of the stores uniquely. Not all the stores carry the identical brands purely because we understand different demographics, different personalities from those demographics dictate what inventory they want to see. We don't carry certain brands that may be a little bit larger for other communities simply out of fashion or preference. Where other communities or other stores may prefer more leather straps than bracelets, or may prefer larger watches than mid-sized watches or everyday pieces. So we really hone into our customers' preferences, what they're looking for, and we curate our store selection based off of that.
Last question. As a watch lover, what's the best way to engage with Bindi? You want to come in, of course sometimes you want to buy things, but most of the time you want to chat, you want to learn, you want to discover. What's the best way to connect?
I mean, without question, coming into the store is always your best opportunity to come in. We're always going to be happy to sit down and chat with you, talk about watches brand by brand, case by case if you prefer. But nowadays I know it's really challenging with everything going on in 2020. So we've opened our realm to make it more comfortable for consumers to come in and inquire by engaging on video conferences, over the phone, FaceTime, you name it. If there's a way that we can communicate with our consumer, we're happy to do so. If you prefer email, if you prefer text, we're happy to do so. Whatever you prefer, we're willing to make happen just so that we can share the knowledge with you.
Ashwin, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Now we're going to speak to Ron Bindi about some of the watches that they are excited about selling in 2020. Hey everyone, Ariel Adams here with aBlogtoWatch, filming from Microlux. I am still here at Bindi, and now I'm speaking to Ron Bindi, part of the Bindi family, part of the watch enthusiast generation of Bindi.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about some of the watches right now, towards the end of 2020, that you're excited about selling, not only a cross-section of some, but not all the brands that Bindi carries,
right,
but some of the watches that you truly enjoy as someone who is themselves a watch lover. So why don't you tell me the first of these brands that you want to talk about?
I would probably get right into one of my favorites is Tudor.
Okay.
I think with Tudor, they really came out with a great product with the Tudor 58 in the 39 millimeter, just a relaunch of a very classic dive watch. And I believe that the dimensions on the watch, the price point, the in-house movement, everything you get for the value that you're spending in collecting.
Now, what is it about Tudor? Because you've described the watch well, but you haven't really explained why as a watch lover you like it. Not only this watch, but the Tudor brand, because you yourself are a Tudor collector.
Correct.
So what is it that appeals to you about the brand? What did they do right with Ron?
I mean, I think their transition into in-house manufacturing, for me, was a big part of the value you get in your investment, especially from a young collector standpoint. Not everyone can get into a Rolex or a Patek, but Tudor, a sister company of Rolex, really, embodying the same manufacturing principles, is offering such a great piece at a value that they're offering it for. So that, their history into the dive watches, into the manufacturing, in this case, the Blue 58 with the snowflake hands, just bringing back a little bit of that vintage history into their modern watch. The Heritage Collection being my favorite because they really are relaunching historical pieces for guys that are just getting into watch collection to be able to purchase, as opposed to getting into vintage. You can get the same look at the right price point in a new collection.
So it's not just the look you like, but you really appreciate the technicity, as well as the fact that there's history, i.e. something to talk about.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, talking watches is something me and Ashwin do a lot of, and we love doing it with our clients. I think it's a brand that you can really engage with, and there's a lot of history behind it.
So what do you do in this situation where there's a consumer that you speak to that for whatever reason, the brand that you like doesn't resonate well with them? Do you try to convince them the brand is good, or do you respect that they have a different relationship?
No, absolutely. I mean, you have to respect the customer's perspective on watch collecting. We're not here so much to enforce and say this is what we carry, this is what we have to offer you. It's about learning what the customer wants, what they're looking for, what they like, and pairing. We may not have the exact brand that they're looking for, but have an example of the type of watch that they're looking for, whether it be a dive watch, whether it be a chrono, or a high complication. It's about having a conversation and comparing, almost comparing notes. What are you looking for in a watch, and what do I think about that opinion of your watch, or what I have as far as my opinion on what we have to offer? So
when you find someone in the local community here in Southern California that also likes Tudor, do you find that you have other things in common with them, or does the similarity sometimes stop at liking Tudor?
I think it's both. I think sometimes there's similarities with a customer, and that's the best thing about being in retail, is that we meet people from all different aspects of life and financial positions and in what they do for a living. And that's part of the fun is outside of the building, we may never actually circle in a social group, but coming into the watch community, we're liking the same types of watches, the same brands, and have almost the same taste. And that's part of the fun of being a retailer, having that approach, and being a watch enthusiast, because you meet so many different types of people going to watch meets that you get to share the experience and your love for watches.
Now, when I first started to get to know Bindi, one of the brands that you were very excited about carrying was Nomos, and like many watch retailers that were sort of getting into watches, Nomos is a brand that they like to start with. You still carry Nomos, it does well for you. Tell us a little bit about what Nomos did to romance Bindi and why it continues to be part of your assortment.
Well, I think also, for me, one of the first watches was when they brought the swing system into their in-house manufacturer. And again...
For people that don't know, you'll have to explain the swing system.
The swing system is a part of the escapement, usually outsourced by many manufacturers because of the amount of labor and cost that goes into design, efficiency, and manufacturing costs. For Nomos and an independent company to in-house all of that into the manufacturer and putting into a watch at such a great offering, for me, was what really brought me to the brand. I also really liked their sleek design, very minimalistic, a lot of details into their hands, the refined cases, and it was something different from the sport watches that we'd have here as well. So that was, for me, what brought me to Nomos.
As I'm thinking about Nomos, I'm realizing that there's going to be a lot of consumers out there that get into watches because of something like Nomos, whereas if they only knew about a watch like Rolex, they might not. What types of people get into watches because of Nomos, but Rolex would have completely missed them over?
I think it's a collector looking for minimalistic. Rolex is a dive watch brand. It's a brand founded on waterproofness, a lot of the watches that you know are more sporty. The refined watches, Cellini and Datejust, are not as exposed to the public as some of the other watches are. And so Nomos is capturing a market that's looking for something more refined, a smaller case, and that sits more like a classic timepiece on your wrist.
And what do you personally like about Nomos? They make an assortment of watches. Which are some of your favorites?
I love, again, their Metro 37. I also believe their Minimatic that was released 3 years ago is a fantastic watch. It's 35 millimeter case. It's an in-house movement, and it's roughly 18 millimeters in thickness. So it's just a beautiful watch. And the pop of color. It's got a little bit of orange in the dial, and I always love a little color in the watches I collect.
Awesome. Okay, let's move on to some more. So Bell & Ross is a brand that I've liked for a long time. I've been a fan. I believe that as I first started to get to know Bindi, it was very much about Bell & Ross. There was certain advertising in the Glendale Galleria Mall for it.
Right.
Tell us about a brand like this. What type of consumer is this for? What do you like in this Paris-based
This is
watchmaker?
definitely for someone in the aviation sport realm. I think, they have a signature case, the BR03, which, again, it's their signature square case. It's instrumental. For me, their newest release, the BR05, very refined, beautiful integrated bracelet, and the dial, the blue tone, I think it's just a perfect color of blue. So it's a great brand. It's definitely more sport related and caters to that aviation clientele.
Now, sport and Southern California sort of go together, right? In what occasions do people have nowadays to wear non-sport watches? And tell us about some of those consumers.
Well, I would say that's, especially now given current status of people being at home more often, but in California, casual is the new cool, and you can really go fine dining casual. You can go to many events just as casual as possible. So it's really just about personal flair. Wearing a more refined watch to a dinner, to a reception, a more formalized event, or really just putting on a Nomos Minimatic 35 millimeter with your shorts and t-shirt. Why not? It's California, so anything goes here as far as style and what's really on your wrist. It's really
And
just
not
about being
everyone
comfortable.
realizes that, right? Because in certain parts of the world, they wear, at least compared to us, more like costumes. Like they all have to sort of wear the same thing.
Right.
When we travel, because we've seen each other in all different parts of the world,
Yeah.
we go to places where it's not like Southern California, and you can't get away with wearing as much variety as you do here.
Right.
And I don't think that everyone always understands that a watch collector here truly has an opportunity to have a whole assortment of different types of watches for different occasions, because even though it's good weather and casual rules, you can get away with anything here.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the beauty of being based in SoCal is, you can wear a watch with a leather strap, very minimalistic, and in most parts of the world it would be considered formal, and or wear a 44 millimeter, Breitling Chronomat GMT with the new bullet bracelet, bulky, and it just has a presence on your wrist. But either way, you could wear it to the same function.
One of the times we spoke recently, you were very excited about selling Grand Seiko, and now you have Grand Seiko. As a retailer, your enthusiasm worked, and people don't understand that you can't just start selling a watch because you want to. You have to develop a relation with the company.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about the story from a retailer perspective. You like a product, how do you then go about selling that product?
Well, I mean, again, it's first starting to just learn more. I mean, a lot of times it's about what our consumers are interested in. It doesn't always start from a retailer standpoint. From a collector standpoint, I started to read more about Grand Seiko. Also having our clients suggest bringing up Grand Seiko. And in this case, it was really more about what a consumer was looking for that sparked interest in us to go further into the brand and dive into it. And then, reach out. And reach out to the brand and reach out to them to offer our new clientele base, and in hopes that the partnership works for both sides. And in this case, it absolutely does and will. It's the newest brand we've added to the Bindi family as far as the watch collection is concerned, and we're very excited about what they do as a brand and the growth that they have. Something about the spring drive technology and the amount of precision that goes into their case manufacturing. That's what really got to me, is the lines that they have on their watches are amazing.
And for the consumers that weren't demanding it but then got to see it, how did they respond? It's the newest brand, like you said. You never are quite sure what people make of it.
Right.
You know, how have some of the things that people have said or responded surprised you or gone along with what you knew as a watch lover?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think for new clients that didn't know anything about it, they hear Grand Seiko and they're tying it to Seiko. But with more information and time spent talking about the brand, the history behind the brand, and the enthusiasm behind the brand is what will win over our consumers. Outside of the ones that already knew about it, it's a lot of fun to talk about the new product with the customer and then to see the growth, their love for the brand to grow over time and then be comfortable enough to make the purchase. Yeah.
Now let's talk about Montblanc, which is a brand that I like a lot. German watchmaker. They make some really fantastic, watches. And like Seiko, they have stuff at an entry-level price point and higher echelon. I'm of the opinion that even though Montblanc is a sort of democratic, well-known luxury name, you have to be a real watch connoisseur to understand it. Agree or disagree?
Agreed. I mean, having the Minerva manufacturer under their belt, it really, dives into the historical line and into some of their watches and movements that are just beautiful. And I think some of the best out there. Davide Serrato does an amazing job designing some of these watches. And it's nice to see them take from their high-end manufacturing down to the cost efficiency one where it's more affordable. For example, their Minerva monopusher that they did a couple years ago at a retail of $25,000, and they were able to take the technology, learn from Minerva, bring it into their Laloc manufacturer, and bring out a beautiful monopusher that's available for $5,000 with a beautiful white dial, great hands, and a great look.
And the same brand can do it in a way where if one brand did the higher end one and someone else came in lower end, it wouldn't be as interesting. That the same brand did it makes it for collectors like us more intellectually satisfying.
Absolutely. I mean, and again, from a collector standpoint, knowing that the technology and design came from a Minerva movement, it's more exciting. It's also great to just see that a brand has the upper tier manufacturing and is also really interested in making sure that that entry level client can also share in the experience of the movement.
So a company like Montblanc produces a large number of watches any given year. You as a retailer have to ask yourself, which of the models works for our market?
Right.
And how do you make that decision? Help people understand how as a retailer, you like a brand, you can't take everything that they have.
Yeah.
How do you look at their selection and be like, these will work well, not just for my taste, but our audience is going to like this?
Personally, it's one of the hardest things to do. As a watch enthusiast, I usually am excited about everything they release, and I'll take it all. But you're right, we really need to refine. The idea is to really make sure we get a sample of what they've released. Not to take anything out, but to be able to bring in a small collection of what highlights their new releases or novelties, and not to overkill on one side or the other. But it is the hardest part to dictate because you may not always get it right. We go with what we like, and it may not always be what the consumer likes, and it's working with the brand to figure that out in the end of the day.
But it's a level of curation, meaning before it shows up here, there's not just you, but a team that says, we feel that people are going to like these.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Zenith. Here's a couple of the new Zenith watches. Now, Zenith is among sort of the higher end in terms of average price point watches we talked about here. Of course, not the highest price point.
Right.
You have watches a lot for that entry-level consumer, but there's also a lot of people that just sort of feel comfortable staying there.
Right.
Do you find that people move from a $2,000 or $3,000 watch to a higher price point, or are they generally speaking to two different types of people?
No, I think there's definitely the aspirational customer. They're going to go from an entry-level watch, get familiar, get comfortable, understand that their investment has gone to something they could talk about, and then eventually, something that's achievable, that's going to be something that they purchase for accomplishment, for something that's a celebration. So I definitely see our consumers that may start at one price point cross over to a higher price point.
Final question. Among these Zenith watches, and again, you're someone that likes the stories behind watches as well as sort of the technical merits they have. What is something that if someone came in, you want to share it with them? There's a bit of information that you've never noticed from seeing it, but it's a technical story that is just marvelous. What is one that you would share about one of these Zenith watches?
I would probably go straight into the Defy 21. I mean, to be able to get a chronograph that's 1/100th of a section in a manufacturing standpoint, there's just a lot of beauty in the design. The movement's amazing. From a collector interested in technology, to be able to get that technology into a watch at a price point that makes sense, to have 2 power reserves, it's amazing, and I think it's something that they did a great job coming into.
Ron, Bindi, thank you so much for speaking to me about watches. I love coming to the store. Anyone interested in learning about the Bindi stores here in Artesia or Glendale or other ones, you can go to bindi.com. I love having our watch chats. I look forward to the next one.
Thank you.